So a big one is common bike position mistakes. One am I correcting, and one that gives me the advantage over everybody that's out there doing this really.
I came from the mud, there's dirt on my hands. Strong like a tree, there's roots where I stand. Oh, I've been running from the law. Hope they won't shoot me down soon.
Number one, a lot of mistakes that people make nowadays is like saddle height. A lot of people riding way too high on the saddle, especially like triathletes. They're like the worst. They always want to pull forwards like on like the bike, and then what they're doing in that extreme is they're engaging like their hamstrings. They're going to engage the calf a lot more, and then that's going to have an effect like you running on like the bike. And what that does do is if the saddle's like too high, then generally you'll see like people pull quite forwards. For a lot of people, again, like if you're too far forwards on the back, like long term is you're going to utilize like your back quite a lot. But the two, it's kind of quite a hard one, like, you know, like with fore and after a saddle, this is where it gets really complicated. That, you know, like you change you know, like if you come too far forward on the saddle, you've got to bring the saddle up. If you kind of go too low on the saddle, you've got to take it back. And some people make saddle changes, and that's another good one that I'm always mistaken. People will make these changes on the bike, they can't get on with the saddle, but is that the saddle doesn't work for you, or is it the fact that the saddle's too high? So that comes to the saddle height. Another one is like cleat positioning, like it's quite individualized, like where we need to go like with cleats. Like obviously if the cleat goes backwards, it's quite a common trait that we now utilize, because on most shoes we can't get the cleat like back far enough. Then you've got the fore and the after of the cleats, that kind of like the amount of people that I see like work, you know, like they're riding like this and they're catching the stays, especially like with a lot of the new bikes, because the stays are quite wide, especially if you've got like disc brakes. So cleat is another one that I'm always having to correct, and something that you probably need to, you know, like look at. So if you're catching like your top tube, then there's probably a reason for that. You might like have like a twisted hip, or your cleat position is just like in the wrong place. A big one that we see like a lot now is like the reach on like a lot of people's bikes. Is a lot of people aren't long enough, especially if you've been sat with like motion capture. Like Retool's a great example, great machine, does well, it's great for hip angles, but for a lot of people it puts you in like this really neutral, safe position. For triathletes, they generally can't hold that position because it builds like too much fatigue like into like their shoulders, and it also affects like the stability of the bike. That's another common trait that, you know, I'm always having to fix, and that's just going to depend on like each person of where that position like needs to go to. Then we look at like the height of the front end is like a key one. Like a lot of people, they've got like these extreme saddle heights and they're really slammed, where like a lot of the bike fits that we actually do now is, it's quite surprising that actually coming higher with all these new, you know, like the adjustability of like poles, we've just got to work out like what that angle, you know, needs to be. Because nowadays is, if we can change like that back positioning and we can get this flow between like the helmet and the back, then we're going to cut through the air and go like really quick. Yeah, I don't think, you know, like being aero, if you look at somebody like myself, is I can ride with like quite a closed hip angle, but even my position this last few years I'd definitely say has changed. Now we've got these adaptability with poles, is we can close like this gap, keep the air attached and cut through the air like a lot quicker. Another big one, pad positioning, like the amount of people that have kind of just riding with like the wrong pads and they're just burning, you know, they just can't sustain like the position. So that's again just individual like on like the person. So a lot of it is just breaking it down really. It's good for me because a lot of people keep like making like the same mistakes, but I think you cannot look at like one position that somebody's riding and think that's the position for you. It's so individualized. So if it's something that you struggle with, then you definitely need to look at getting a proper bike fit. And some of the sometimes you can kind of change one area that can just transform like the whole fit. So, but there's so many mistakes. Common mistake is, so if we start like with the height of the saddle, so if you're feeling like a lot of hamstring pain, or like one side's being utilized more than the other, then that's generally that your saddle height is too high. If your saddle's like too low, then generally your quads will be burning out before like anything else. If you're feeling a lot of foot discomfort, then that's generally going to come down to the cleat positioning around like where it's sitting along like the metatarsal joint. If you're experiencing like burning shoulders, then a lot of that will come down to like pad positioning, but also like the height of the extension that you're actually riding. If you're getting numb hands, then it's generally that your brake positioning is not in the right place, or your stem reach is not correct. So they're like the common traits that we generally see. Where it gets more complicated is if like you're seeing a lot of pain or discomfort on one side of the saddle, then that can come down to the leg length discrepancy. It could be saddle height. It could be that you've got like a twisted hip. That's when you definitely need to start looking at like bike, getting a professional bike fit. Knee pain, foot pain, these are all kind of interlinked to kind of like the bike positioning. But they're the sensations that you're gonna experience. Head pain's quite a common trait, like a lot of people, they'll like get like a lot of burning sensation in the neck and the head. But again, that's just gonna be coming down to like your bar positioning. A good one to correct, like understanding if you've got like the right saddle setback and height, is if you kind of sit on the bike and you let your arms go. If you kind of fall forwards, then generally you know that your saddle's like too far forward. So they're the key